Okay. Just know that you're on live stream right now.
Okay, we're on live stream right now. Okay, good morning, all. Thank you for coming to our fifth Sunday program. I'm Deacon Robert Gunn. I'm Vice President of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History here at Shiloh Baptist Church, the Carter G. Woodson branch, and we have given our fifth Sunday program to the Gathering the Stones effort. The last fifth Sunday we had Deacon Dr. Sandra Giles Barber, who went into Gathering the Stones, and it was such a great presentation that we've asked her to come back with us, and we'll know that this presentation will be as good as the other one. But maybe open with a prayer. Our Lord and our God, we thank you for allowing us to come out to the house of prayer to gather in your name. Lord, we ask that you be with us all, open up our hearts and our minds to all that your presenter has to give us this morning. Let it all be for your name and for your honor and for your glory. This we ask in the name of your Son, Jesus the Christ. Amen. Amen. Our presenter today is, again, Dr. Sandra Giles Barber. She is the chair of the history department of the University of District of Columbia, and she has a great wealth of knowledge. Here at Shiloh, she's a deacon, she's a church school teacher, she's an usher, and she does many things. And we know it's all for God's honor and for his glory. And with that, Deacon Dr. Sandra Giles Barber.
They can hear it.
Good morning. And thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here. My mother told me very early that people do not have to ask you to speak, and they certainly don't have to ask you to come back. So I think I did something okay. My grandchildren, well, thank you. My grandchildren approved. They said that they heard that I wasn't too long and I had a lot of pictures. So one of the things that I love about Shiloh, many things, but one of the things I love about Shiloh is our emphasis on education and our history and teaching and how we utilize the scriptures for our everyday life. Right? We understand that coming to Shiloh, we just are not here to be in the church. When we go out, we are to utilize all those gifts that God has given us. As a historian, I am always looking at the larger picture, sort of an umbrella effect, bringing some context to things that we look at, historical actors, historical events, and that translates, of course, into spiritual. So when we were looking at, Joshua 4:1-8, it was an indication for me, not only as a woman warrior of God, but as a historian, to understand that this was an early public history event. They were marking an event that was historic and leaving evidence for those who were coming after to understand what had happened. And those who were still alive for a period of time were able to talk about that, especially to their children. So I'm going to be lifting up the 6th and 7th verse of that, where we are asked, where they say, when your children ask you, what are these stones? You know what to tell them. So we're looking at Bloody the Road We Trod, Gathering Stones as Public Memorials. So we're looking at not only the spiritual stones, but those physical stones that we have used as public memorials to document the road that we've trod, right? I will not tell you about the horrors of the computer. We all know that, but suffice it to say, things have worked out, so we will just keep it moving and give God the glory. The verses we're going to be looking at as we talk about this morning, and it's going to be a conversation that will be time for us to have. I want your input. I want you to tell me about some of the public memorials, some of the stones that you have seen, that you visit, and that you utilize, and that you perhaps have made for your own family, so that your children and grandchildren will understand the accomplishments, the trials, the struggles, and the achievements of your own family. that this may be a sign among you, that when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what mean ye these stones? Then ye shall answer them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it passed over Jordan, the waters of Jordan were cut off, and these stones shall be a memorial unto the children of Israel forever. So those stones have been elevated to a 21st century statement, and they are monuments, they are cemeteries, they are public repositories. They're the National Museum of African American History and Culture. They're right on the corner. They're the Carter G. Woodson sculpture that I hope you have taken your children or grandchildren to and read the plaque on there. They're the WCA on the corner, the Phyllis Wheatley Y. We are a public history memorial here, Shiloh. When the founders came from the South, bloody the road we trod to here, to establish this church, to acknowledge what God had brought them through. So I'm looking as we move forward as the gathered stones is not just those little physical stones that we were given, even those are inspirational, but in a broader picture of how we are documenting and letting people know what it is that we have overcome, what it is we have accomplished, and how God has brought us through. Now, this is a lot of text, and I apologize, I know better. But we're just going to talk a little bit about the importance of Black cemeteries in documenting the road we trod. There has been a lot of activity around preserving Black cemeteries. We know what happened to the Columbia Harmony Cemetery in Virginia when all of those graves and headstones were washed down the river. And I think it was a congressman, he and his wife had just bought the property, and they were walking along the edge of their property and they saw the headstones, and then they saw a coffin, and they saw another headstone, and realized that this was from a cemetery, and it was an African-American cemetery. So there's a major project going on to revive and reclaim that cemetery. There's also one going on in Washington, D.C., Woodlawn Cemetery. Woodlawn is closed, but to preserve the cemetery, there's a group that's formed, and they have a group, but there's some Deltas and AKAs have gotten together, and we have this Woodlawn Preservation Group that's working to preserve that cemetery. But these are places where our history is, where our ancestors lie, where we document the challenges that they overcame. And so it is a learning place. I mean, I think we're kind of past the time when people thought cemeteries were morbid places and you didn't want to go. We have evolved from that. So people have festivals, they have cleanups, they bring young people in, young people work on these projects to reclaim these cemeteries, to clean them up, to put the headstones, the tombstone headstones back in, to get an idea of what the struggle was and how people had to claim an area to be buried in because they were not allowed to be buried in an integrated manner. Some of the things on the slides, and I'm just going to talk about these three. Many of you know I travel to New York. We take our students on an annual New York history trip. COVID kind of stopped us, but we're back on track. Hopefully next semester, we'll be going back to the African burial ground. And these three that are documented here, it's not that they're more important than anything in DC. They just perhaps had greater notoriety because they were in New York City, especially the African burial ground. Many of you heard about that. That was discovered in 1991. It was a major find. There was a building being constructed on that property, and they found these bones. And there is a law from it's a 20th century law that says if you are building on federal land and you find any kind of artifacts, you have to stop the construction and bring in archivists and historians and archaeologists to determine whose artifacts they are, whose bones they are. And this goes back to a Native American challenge because so many of their things were taken when people were building and doing excavations and things. So African Burial Ground, 1991, they find all of these bones. They bring them to Howard University, shout out to HU. And they do all of this work and they discover these were enslaved Africans in New York City. Now, when we think of slavery, we don't normally think of New York City, right? We think of the South, especially when we think of intensive slavery, heavy work, the cotton picking, the kind of physical labor that was so devastating that people just didn't live long. They just couldn't because they were worked so hard. But they found that kind of labor had been inflicted upon these enslaved Africans, and they could tell because the bones in the neck had been infused to the spine because they carried these heavy objects on their head. And it was men, women, and children. So in the world of academia, it was extraordinary. Fine to have this. Now this is expanding the knowledge of where slavery took place in the country, and there's more documentation, so the narrative is changing. But it also just increased the devastation that we know our ancestors had to endure and endure in the northern part of the city. So for those individuals who were teaching or who thought that slavery only took place in the South, this was eye-opening. Right. And what was really intriguing to me was the way the community rallied around to reclaim this. There were meetings and rallies and movements to make sure that there was a respectful way that these bones were treated. And they built caskets, they reinterred them. What they also discovered that the area was much larger than what they thought. And there's still more than 15,000 bodies that cannot be reclaimed because so much building has been done. So we see the importance that people gave to burials. There's also a wonderful documentary that they do. They built a museum along with the monument that's outside. We'll see some pictures of that moving forward. But I'm saying this to encourage you in this time where our history is under assault in the public schools and even in some areas of higher education, that we do not have to be deterred. Our children can learn our history. Our grandchildren can learn our history if we reclaim it, reclaim the teaching of it. Carter G. Woodson was very clear when he founded Negro History Week that it was not going to be taught in the schools. It was going to be the churches. It was going to be the sororities. It was going to be the community groups. It was going to be the families. That's what we need to reclaim, and we are. I'm not bashing anyone because we're doing it. Shiloh has always done it. Family members do it. They do it at the family reunions. They're interviewing. They're using their phones to do videos, to record the elders in the family. So we are doing this. So I just don't want us to be discouraged by Texas and Florida, right? Because there are ways that we can make sure that our young people can get this history. And so we just need to be actively involved, and we are. So I'm encouraging us to continue. There's also a Negro burying ground that was established in the mid-1600s in Harlem, right? That has been rediscovered, and that is being reclaimed as well. Another teaching moment. So you see school groups going there, you see community groups, you see churches, organizations who are learning the history of the burial grounds and importance and significance and how it chronicles what was going on in the country at that time. Right. So again, a northern entity. And Seneca Village, which is Central Park. And I know most of you, if you've been to New York, you've been to Central Park, beautiful, but that used to be an African conclave, right? That was taken over, eminent domain, and became Central Park. And these were displaced Africans who were moved. Why do we preserve Black cemeteries? For the reasons that we all know, that we've already discussed, but it's important when you decide that you want to go visit your relatives. You gather together, you take family members, you get flowers, you go and stand, you reflect. You're able to share with young people, new members of your family who are just learning your family history, what your ancestors did. And you're also learning about the area where you are. Why was it important for Washington, D.C. to have a woodlawn cemetery? What is the history of that? And it intrigues, it can inspire some research of your own. It also is important because we want to continue to honor our ancestors. Birth and burial are two ways that are important in doing that. At birth, most of you who saw Kunta Kinte and you were holding the baby up, though the only thing greater than you is God, right? And so the birth and the death of our family members are critical elements for us, and we want to honor them. Of course, what's important is the dash in between, and we support that and we enhance that by making sure that that history is known. And Black cemeteries and burial grounds are a way of doing that. My fellow deacon, Deacon Roland Hill, made a comment at the first presentation about seeing markers for burials. I don't know if it was stones. And so I knew that I wanted to include that because there's something about the decoration. We always have swag, no matter what we do. It's not just going to be plain. We got something going on with it, but that's a celebration of the life that our ancestors lived. It was colorful. Yes, it was challenging, but it was also colorful and meaningful and rich and full of faith. So we see all of that many times in our burial grounds. And one of the critical sites is the decorations because they have meaning. We may think that they don't. And to relate that to a more unfortunate contemporary piece, when we see the teddy bears and the wine bottles and the sneakers, many times we say, oh, why don't they remove those things? But that is significant to a certain group of people, right? That is their way of honoring, right? Just like people sometimes go to cemeteries and see things we put and who are not of our culture, who do not understand, well, why is there a bottle there? Why do they have a vase? These are many times artifacts that were important to people in their life. They symbolize the afterlife. They symbolize the life they led. And it's important to have that decoration to show that we respect and honor that. And this is significant enough that we want you to be drawn to it. And whether you understand it or not, our children who will ask us what these stones mean will know when we tell them. So I love going to cemeteries. That may be a little... I used to live on Capitol Hill, and Congressional Cemetery was there. And if you know the history of Congressional, was one of the early cemeteries that interred Black people, right? So you can go and you see some interesting graves there. We used to walk our dogs, and one of the things that sort of bothered me was the people were knocking over the headstones. This was in the 80s. And young people, and we say they were young people, but we don't know. People were knocking over the headstones and disrespecting the gravesite and the cemetery. So we got together, formed a group, and we sort of made a structured dog walking schedule. So people would see us there and we all cleaned up after our dogs, would see us, and they would not come over and be as destructive. And it worked, right? And it was just important to make sure that there was an honoring of the burial sites for individuals. And Roland, I really thought about you, Deacon Hill. The bottle trees. Bottle trees have long been something that was used to honor ancestors. The bottles were used to hold, sometimes they said they held the spirits of the ancestors, but many times you did not have other decorations to use. So you utilized what you had, and the bottle symbolized the spirit of the person who had passed away. And this is a 1997 image in Alabama. So it's not that old. And there are some areas of the country where that is still practiced, right? The African burial ground, again, this is one of the images. How many have been to the African burial ground in Lower Manhattan? Okay. I think Deacon Gunn, we may have to plan a trip. I will be more than happy to tour guide for this. It is so critical. It's National Park Service. It's free, right? You just need to, if you have a group more than 20, you just need to make a reservation. And it is, once you see this, and you see the film that talks about the history of enslaved Africans in New York and the trauma that they went through, and then see when the burial ground was reclaimed and the activism of the community and how they were determined and made sure that this was not going to be ignored, that there was going to be a proper burial, there was going to be a proper memorial, and this was going to be a place where people would come and understand the struggle that enslaved Africans had in New York City, and it would be acknowledged. And it's a beautiful, beautiful site. Let me just go back for one moment. The outside of this, there are Ndinkra symbols. This was built to be a libation. How many know libations? Libations? Okay, good. I see a young pan up there. Good. Libations. So when we go visit, after we tour, we come outside, and this part of the monument is built like a tent. And there's water running through. It's just absolutely beautiful. And you walk through, and then you walk around here, and outside are the symbols and the definitions of what they mean. So inside you do the libation, and it was built, it's called the libation area. So it was built intentionally for people to do libations, and you call the names of your ancestors. And we do this with our students, and they are just, it's very emotional, and they're calling the names of their family members. They're calling the names of friends that they have lost. And it's just, and those individuals who come in not knowing or being nonchalant about history or thinking it's dull and boring, once they've seen the documentary, once they've toured inside, there's a museum, once they've toured the exhibit, and then come outside, it's a very moving moment for everyone concerned. Because you can actually, when you center yourself, feel the presence of those individuals who were neglected for so long and now have been brought into light. So it's just absolutely beautiful. The other stones that we talk about are markers. How many have seen the historical markers? If Shaw has them, if you walk down Shaw, 7th Street has them. There's some near Howard on Georgia Avenue. U Street has them. Stop and look at those, especially if you have your young people with you, right? Read those markers. They tell you the history of that area. They tell you what people accomplished. They tell you the churches that were there. They tell you the institutions that were there. They tell you the individuals that were doctors, lawyers, or just workers. Doesn't have to be doctors, doesn't be professional, but just individuals. And you're finding that history by this marker. This to me is one of the stones that we can use stones.
15 minutes.
Okay, that we can use stones to expand our history, to inform our children. So when they ask us, what does this mean? Why is it important that we have a marker that talks about Howard University Hospital? Why is there a marker that talks about Shaw? Why is there a marker that talks about the importance of churches in this city? So it's really critical that we look at these. And one of the reasons I put this one in, because it says buried here are carpenters, cooks, oystermen, laundresses, nursemaids, housekeepers, midwives, soldiers, and seamen, people who rested on Sunday and went to church. Okay, so it doesn't have to be a famous figure, right? Because we want to acknowledge those individuals who are not necessarily in the spotlight, who didn't get the headlines, who we don't talk about on Black History Month. But we all know that they prayed us through to get to be where we are. So these markers, I think, are really critical and another important way that we can utilize stones. This one in Fort Hunt, I just like the fact that this one goes back from the late 1700s, right? So we understand that a lot of our cemeteries aren't new. They just didn't spring up in the 20th century. They are older than that. Many in our area are from the 1800s, right? And so it's critical to understand that the importance of the cemetery to our people is one that has long, long history, right? We always understood the importance of bearing people with respect and dignity and coming back to not only let others know, but to talk with them, right? How many, we commune, and we don't think that's anything wrong with that, right? We're not going to seek therapy because we go and stand at the graveside and talk to our mother, our father, whomever. There's some solace in that, right? And so being able to keep the cemeteries and preserve them is important if for that reason alone. So we have had that understanding. So those are markers. And when our young people ask us, what did grandmother do? What did grandfather do? Right? We can say, well, let me show you. Okay. We'll talk about the history. And this is where we bury grandmother because it was near the house. This is where she was raised. It's where grandfather, whatever it is. But make sure that we pass that on. It's not a morbid subject. And we would be surprised that our young people really are interested in a lot of these things, especially if we present it to them as a way of knowing their ancestors and not just going somewhere where someone is buried and there's a stone and that's it. As long as we present it that way, they'll want to know more. This one was interesting because there's so many of us that do this. We, in our family, we got new headstones for our parents. We're in Atlantic City, New Jersey. But those of you who know Atlantic City, you cannot have a cemetery in Atlantic City because we are below water level. So our cemeteries are in Pleasantville. And so in order to go visit someone, if you don't have a car, you get on the bus. I mean, it's not prohibitive, but it's not like you can just walk across the street as I can from my house. There's a Rock Creek Cemetery near me. But so you have to do something. And you're very intentional when you go. Our sister has become the keeper of the gravesite. So she visits regularly. She gives, thank goodness for technology. She does FaceTime. We commune with mom and dad through her. She puts flowers there. But that's an important piece, being able to get there and being able to have that conversation and having somewhere to go to acknowledge the contributions and the fact that you have laid someone to rest with honor, dignity, and they're in peace. This is Chicago Center. This is Tony Burrows. He's the CEO of Chicago Center for Black Genealogy. He's taking a picture of his great-grandfather, and that's Oak Ridge Cemetery in Hillside. And I just want to read this quote. "I realized they were right under my feet," he says. "I can reconstruct my ancestors that are not in history books, but they live. They survive, and it's up to me to tell their stories." And it's up to us to tell their stories. And we can do that by making sure that we understand the importance of these cemeteries, the importance of these markers, acknowledging what our ancestors have done. These are all my sources. And I want to thank you for being here and for just being engaged in this conversation. Are there any questions or comments? Yes, and then young man. Yes.
I just want to come. This was a good session. Learn more about that Black African American culture.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Yes, young man. Yes, you had your hand up. Okay, I think the question was, did we find out that the families were enslaved from the bones?
people used to know the family was sad. They realized that their ancestors.
Right. Some of them, in just remembering reflections from 1991, I was a graduate student at the time. And very much this was a big deal for us, those who were historians in grad school. And to have that perspective, and the young man is right. Some families were very sad. Some families were angry. Many families were very angry that their ancestors had been treated like this. Many thought that somebody knew, that there was a gravesite there and did not care because it was an African site and they were going to build and build and build, and they did. So yes, there were a lot of emotions. There were some who were very sad, some who were encouraged because they had been doing research. They were genealogists. They had been trying to research their family history. And so for them, this gave validation to what they had been doing, because you know how but you just can't find it. And now they were able to find it. So yes, good question. Deacon Hill, I'm sorry, Deaconess, and then young man, we'll get back to you with another question. Yes.
Well, mine is not a question. Mine is a comment. Some history we have really close to us that we don't talk about very much. And I don't hear much about it. I started recognizing after World War II. And the place I'm speaking about is called Foggy Bottom, Georgetown. During the 20s and 30s, Black folks didn't live in the city like they do now. Foggy Bottom, Georgetown, where now they got all kinds of high rises and apartments, and no telling how many grave sites have been covered. Because back then they lived in shanty towns, so they go to funeral homes, they had this service in the house.
Right.
The body was brought right in the house. So there's no telling how many grave sites has been covered in Georgetown. The only thing we have now that we can recognize a little bit about Georgetown, some of the old churches are still there.
Right.
But one time we didn't live in the inner city. We lived in Foggy Bottom. And how they got us out of Foggy Bottom after World War II. The shanty town that we owned, Black folks owned. After World War II, they built a few nice homes right in that area where it was and around there. Those homes were expensive. So how they got us out of Georgetown, when it came time, the price of those homes was so high, taxes went up. And so the value of those shanty towns went up. Those Black folks owned those shanty towns, they could not pay the taxes. So that's how they got us out of Georgetown. Same way they about to get us out of DC. They raised the mortgage up. So if we don't do nothing about the same thing will keep happening. Exactly what's happening in Georgetown is happening now, and they're pushing us further and further out. Things are going to be worse. We used to be in the city, and they were in the suburb. Now they're coming back to the city, and we're going back to the suburb where we were in the beginning. So there's no telling how many graves are under and Georgetown. I ain't tell how many, but they couldn't go to the funeral home. They had to bury their own people right close to them, around the churches and yards.
And thinking of what I will say to that, there have been several projects, and there's a young man, a little older than this young man to my right, who Zamani Johnson, who's now at Howard in graduate school, who and I worked with him and his mother several years ago, the Mount Zion Female Union Cemetery that they reclaimed was doing exactly what you're saying. And this was a young man, he was 13 at the time, so it must have been at least 10 years ago, who did that. There has been work done in Foggy Bottom. So what you're saying to me is that now you've put on my plate some other ideas about how to have presentations on that history. And I will certainly be calling on you. Deacon Gunn, I see a couple panels, a couple, mini sessions that we can talk about this, because in my research for this, I came across the work in Foggy Bottom. I came across the work in Georgetown. I'm working with Woodlawn Cemetery, and the National Historic Trust just put the Cabin John there's a Cabin John site that they just put on historic register to preserve it. right? So there is work being done, but you're right. Most people do not know that because most people, you know, people have other things to do. You're not going to the ANC meetings, or you didn't know about, and that's, I mean, that's nobody, I'm not blaming anybody, but that's what we're supposed to do as a history part of the church. We're supposed to be bringing these things to you. And so now that we have started this, and the Gathering the Stones piece is sort of has opened this up, and you see how God is, right? So now we understand that there's that interest, especially with what's going on now contemporarily in reclaiming Black cemeteries, that Deacon Gunn, I will work with you, and we will we will make sure that we have and working with Reverend Mensah to make sure that we can have some embedded dates and some topics that we can prepare you for. Oh, thank you. That we can prepare you for and have some handouts. I am very big on leaving with something, so I'm really disappointed that I had no computer, because I had some really good stuff. So during the series, we'll have some things for you that talk about this. And if you have any suggestions, I mean, that's what we need to be taking, and we'll do that. One of the things, this whole piece about the assault on history in our schools and teaching our young people and what they need to know, what has really, it devastated me for a brief moment. Then I heard my mother saying, well, what are you going to do? Right? Because you can only be devastated for so long. That little pity party ain't cute anymore. So what you going to do? And so I am determined that we will bring this history to us. Now, we are fortunate here in DC, we don't have that pressure, right? We're not Texas, we're not Florida, we're not those places where our faculty or our teachers are scared to teach and can't teach. But we also know that we have a lot of our history that people don't know. And so we can do our part. So if you have suggestions about things that you want to know about, things that you're working on, right? We can even have a presentation. Oh, I'm stepping out of my lane here. Well, if I would like to work on a presentation where you bring in some things that are artifacts from your ancestors and talk about that and share that history with us. But we just don't want to leave it and let it go, because